It's all about LinkedIn. My name's Alistair Morris. If you see reference to Matt Craven on the various documents and electronic givings that goes on with GoToWebinars, because I've pinched his sign on, so it doesn't matter whether you call me Matt or Alistair, I won't take offence, but it's me as pictured doing the webinar this evening. And it's a one-way audio broadcast, so just irrespective of how you've got your webcams and microphones set up, I can't hear anything that you're saying and I can't see you, and fortunately you can't see me, but you should be able to hear me. So to deal with any questions, of which there are normally many, this evening's probably going to fit within the hour as advertised, give or take a few minutes. And normally, if you want to ask a question, the best way of handling it is if you type it into the facility you've got on your GoToWebinar toolbar, then at the end of the session, I'll let you know that we've finished. It will be quite obvious. And then for those that need to shoot off and get on with their lives, that's fine, you can do so. But if you want to listen and listen to my responses to the questions asked, you're by all means welcome to stay on as long as you like. And I will attempt to answer everybody's questions. Sometimes there are lots, sometimes there's not so many. We'll just suck it and see, but I normally stay on and answer everybody's questions. So that'll be the format for this evening. And tonight's all going to be about LinkedIn. I'm going to touch inevitably on some bits and pieces to do with your CVs as well, because they normally form a fair part of content that people use on their LinkedIn profile. And we are going to be looking very much at the quick wins. So there is a lot to LinkedIn, as there are to many things in life. LinkedIn is a very complex tool. It's used by all sorts of people to do all sorts of things. But we're really focusing on how can you use it best to network, influence a bit, and for what most people are interested in, making sure they've got a good presence on the web so that it appeals to people who might be looking for their skill set, which is principally other employers and recruiters. So as I say, quick wins really. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but enough for you to make a difference to your own profile, or if you're frightened of doing that or not able to do that for whatever reason, give you some options to seek help outside. Okay, let's take a look at a little bit about who on earth we are first of all. So you've been invited via Webrecruit, and basically we partner with Webrecruit to offer CV and LinkedIn and interview advice. And unsurprisingly, our company name, CV and Interview Advisors, gives the game away. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time telling you about us, because that's not what we're here for. But what's important is just to understand that we write CVs, people's LinkedIn profiles, offer interview advice and guidance day in, day out. We've been doing it for a number of years. And my own background is formerly as a corporate employee, then as a recruiter within a number of recruitment organisations, then as a CV reviewer within the CV and Interview Advisors, and occasionally a CV writer as well. The reason I mention that is just to give you some confidence that the kind of stuff we're talking about we know works in the marketplace. We know what makes a difference. We know how recruiters are acting, by and large anyway, you know, the standard norm, if you like. We know what makes a difference, and we can provide you, if you can't provide it yourself, with the tools that will help you get more interviews. More of that later. So it's really just to establish ourselves. We want to be reasonably modest and self-contained, but it's important you know that we're coming at this from a point of view of actual practical advice as opposed to theory that we think might work. We know the stuff we're going to talk about this evening does work. May seem a bit obvious. What is LinkedIn? Well, there's a few points that some of you may know, some of you may assume, but we need to set some context. Originally, LinkedIn was almost like and acted almost like a glorified business card folder. So for those of you old enough to remember business cards and how they were used, you turn up at a meeting, you might have had a telephone conversation with somebody beforehand, but if you met somebody face to face, you'd exchange business cards, you'd both walk off with another card to add to your collection, and then from time to time people would look through their little index files or their little wallets with all the business cards stuffed inside them. And some people still do that. Business cards still exist. but LinkedIn was a really useful tool to sort of automate a lot of that and then bring you into contact with other like-minded people very quickly and very efficiently. It's turned into a professional networking site. Some people still get it, and when I talk about some of these things, I know there'll be all sorts of people with all sorts of different levels of knowledge and experience. So I'll assume a fairly common denominator. Most people who approach us and start talking to us saying, okay, I need some help here, or I'd like some advice and guidance there, I'm basing my knowledge on what people understand about LinkedIn and their CV from that sort of average, which tends to be that most people have stumbled across LinkedIn in some form or fashion, or been recommended to become part of it, and taken a fairly casual or laid back or relaxed view towards it, and maybe not put their heart and soul into it, which is fine, but I'll assume that is the sort of the current stance of most people. So it's become this place where people gather mostly from a professional background, and what I was about to say was that a lot of people still mistake it and shy away from it because they fear that it's a sort of a Facebook kind of Twittery kind of place where what they do is seen by all, and that they may risk their career or job by being on LinkedIn and having a presence. And some of those things are partly true, but in reality it is completely different from Facebook and Twitter and things like that. It is a professional networking site. If you use it properly, you don't have to participate in it in every day or working moment of your life. You don't have to exchange communications with people. You don't have to belong to any groups or associations. You don't even have to connect with anybody if you don't want to. You could purely use it, if you like, as a personal website, and it would still do you proud. But we'll talk a little bit about this evening about some of the uses you can make that will really add value, and importantly then how to position yourself on that. And it's become very large. I mean, this number is almost out of date every time it goes up on the slide, but there are literally hundreds of millions of members, and it's growing and growing and growing. And probably our viewpoint on LinkedIn is that if you're in a commercial role doing anything which is reasonably high profile in the sense that there are other people doing the job, you have a skill set, and that you might want to make that skill set available to others, either people hunting for candidates for jobs or other employers who might be interested in your skill set, then LinkedIn is a good place to be. And in our view, you probably have to have some pretty strong reasons as to why you wouldn't want to participate in it. Some of those reasons are valid, but they're probably the minority rather than the majority. Our advice, generally speaking, is that you really should be on LinkedIn if you want to build a profile and use that to leverage a better career sometime in the future. Now, it's important for a number of reasons to understand that all the folk using LinkedIn and what they're getting out of it and how you fit into it. So the first three, fairly obvious. So you've got people who are actually seeking for jobs. They'll look out for, do a bit of research on companies, hiring managers, want to try and connect with them, look for jobs itself. And LinkedIn's now become an incredibly valuable tool to find jobs and be found for jobs. You'll have professionals on there doing research for contacts, and that includes recruiting companies with research teams and independent researchers doing research on individuals and companies for others and charging money for it. And of course you've got recruiters or hiring managers within employers looking to source candidates. That's really important now, and a lot of people underestimate how important LinkedIn has become in the recruitment scene. If you've had experience of it, it might not be a big surprise, but for those that haven't, I think there's a stat later on in this slide set that highlights the fact that last year more people found jobs than they did through Monster.com, and Monster.com is a pretty big job board. It's become that big, and LinkedIn's revenues are inextricably linked to its recruitment performance, and that's what's really saved its bacon, if you like. It's that ability to focus on fairly professional, well-educated, well-skilled individuals on an international basis. So our interests really focus around the recruitment angle, because if you're looking to be identified and have a presence on LinkedIn to maybe further your career, there's obviously some clear do's and don'ts, which we'll come on to very shortly. There's some other people that tend to use it as well, which if you pull them all together, gives you an idea how many people you can reach and influence in your own right. So there's entrepreneurs wanting to grow their own business, showcase their own talents, and there's salespeople looking to find and contact potential clients. So you've got all these people looking and using LinkedIn, and you might think, okay, well, big deal. Why is that relevant, apart from the fact that it may be useful for me to in my own line of work? Well, the main message here is that some folk come to us and say, I don't want to be on LinkedIn, or I want to lock down my profile so as people can't tell I'm looking for jobs. And as soon as I go onto LinkedIn, surely it becomes immediately apparent to my employers that I'm looking for a job. And our answer is, well, yeah, I suppose you could argue that, and if you're really bothered about that, then we wouldn't want to get in the way of that. That's your call, your decision, it's a personal thing. But if there are so many people using LinkedIn to do all these different things, so you've got people, nothing to do with recruitment, doing general research on individuals and companies. You've got salespeople genuinely just trying to find out who to contact to sell their wares. You've got entrepreneurs looking to grow their business and find out ways and means of communicating their message. And probably countless other bodies that we're not even aware of using LinkedIn for some purpose or other. So it's not just about job seeking. You might have that view in your mind. You may solely want to use it for that purpose, but it isn't the only reason why people are using LinkedIn. So do not be too concerned about having your profile on LinkedIn and raising the awareness of others to your objective to further your career. That's probably something you want to worry least about, unless you've got a very good reason as to why that should be, which we'd be more than happy to tackle on a case-by-case basis. So the main message is LinkedIn's really popular, used by lots of people. Don't be afraid to be on it if your only fear is that it may raise other people's interest in why you're on there. You could be on there for all sorts of reasons. And more people are on there. More and more people's bosses are on there. More and more people's companies are on there. It's not an unusual thing anymore. We're going to focus on the job-seeking side. As I said, the note at the bottom of the slide reinforces the fact that LinkedIn's become really, really important as far as seeking jobs are concerned. Number of things you can do, of course. You can search for jobs and apply. You can look in your network as to who might work there already and get some insight. You can search for companies you might be interested in working for and get all the information on them. You can search for decision makers and add them to your network. These are all reasons why you'd want to be on there, helping to grow your profile and awareness within the market. You can use it actively if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to, it's a great tool for doing exactly these kind of things. You can use the network that you've built up, if you have got connections with other people, to find other contacts within their network, get introduced to them. So it helps uncover some of these so-called hidden jobs, or maybe beat the job advert by getting in somebody's face first. All sorts of things that you can do. If you want to take a little bit more, if you've got particular skill set or knowledge and you want to take a little bit further forward, you can participate in discussion groups where people ask questions and you could be one of the people giving the answers, or vice versa. That all helps build a profile. And ultimately, you could find groups where hiring managers are hanging out. Now, if they're in HR, guess what? There's loads of HR groups on LinkedIn. Use them. You get a higher profile. People get to see your profile. They might just see something they like and then participate in something with you. So it's a really great tool just to get noticed if you're that way inclined. If you're not that way inclined, there's still lots of things we can do, which we'll talk about shortly, to make sure your profile works for you. But it can be a really useful thing just to get noticed out there and get people understanding what you've got to offer. However, of course, if what you've got to offer doesn't come across too well, then it's not helping your cause. So we'll get into the detail now about actually writing your profile and some of the things that you should be doing and perhaps some of the things you shouldn't be doing. Number one mistake that most people use when they're setting up their LinkedIn profile, and you'll know whether this is true, of course, of yourselves, they just dump their current CV, or they use their CV as the foundation, which is sort of logical. The CV should have a pretty strong explanation about what you're about, what you've got to offer the world. So taking that across onto LinkedIn probably wouldn't seem to be too much of a mistake. Well, it all depends on the quality of your CV, of course. So if your CV is good and effective, putting it on LinkedIn is not so bad, but how do you know whether it is actually effective or not? So if you just step back a bit from the LinkedIn profile and consider this fact, for those of you who've got a CV who've been actively using it, you'll also know whether it's effective if you measure this stat. And so our angle on this, our view is always the acid test for the CV is the number of interviews it's getting you to applications that you're making, so interview to job application ratio. If you know that, it tells you a lot about your CV and how people are interpreting it. So hypothetically, you apply for 10 jobs. They're 10 jobs that you know you could perform. So you're not a checkout operator who's trying to become a nuclear submarine captain. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But if you're a project manager and you want to become a senior project manager or another project manager, then that's fair and reasonable, particularly if it's in your sector of expertise. You apply for 10 of those jobs. If you get no interviews, it's suggesting that your CV is ineffective. If you get 10 interviews, it's suggesting that you're obviously getting a lot of interest and traction in the CV. It's probably doing its job. So keep an eye on that ratio. If you don't already know it, I guess you'll soon find out if you start applying for jobs, or you can seek help and get people to assess the quality of the CV. But that is the most important measurement, or one of the most important measurements, and probably a strong message to take away this evening. Assess the quality of your CV. If it performs and you're taking a lot of that information onto your LinkedIn profile, not such a bad sign. If it's not performing and you're replicating that information, LinkedIn's working as much against you as it is for you at best. Now, the way of fixing both is to view, if you don't already, your CV and LinkedIn profile as being somewhere that should present a strong business case as to why somebody should hire you. So most people with their CVs, and again, this is the typical CV that comes into our business day in, day out, where people are seeking advice, wanting some help or guidance, and we look at the CV and we think, well, part of the problem here is that your CV is not presenting a business case to your target audience. What do I mean by business case? Well, a bad CV is basically just a list of things. So if you've got just a list of jobs, hobbies, interests, responsibilities, educational achievements, qualifications, whatever, it's just purely a list of things matter-of-factly, it probably points to your CV being weak. Again, acid test. If you're getting interviews with that CV, ignore what I'm saying. If you're not getting interviews, take it as a warning sign and think, should I be doing something here? Is this guy actually telling me something useful? So in our experience, if you present a strong business case as to why somebody should hire you, so think of it, yeah, they're going to, whoever's going to employ you is going to invest tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of pounds every year in you. What return are they going to get on that investment? Your CV needs to be some pretty strong clues as to how they're going to get a return on that investment, the business case as to why they should hire you. Conversely, of course, your LinkedIn profile needs to support that and back it up. So if there's a disconnect between the two, that's a bad thing. And if you're just replicating a poor CV with a poor LinkedIn profile, when people read it and find you or check you out, they're going to get an equally weak message coming across. It won't compel them to do anything other than maybe reject your application. So how and why and what can we do to make LinkedIn profiles stronger? Well, for any of those familiar with LinkedIn, you'll know that when you open up and look at your profile, the very first thing that you see is name, if you've got one, a photo, and a bit of text underneath your name, which is called a professional headline as far as LinkedIn's concerned. We'll take a look at a real-life example shortly. What most people default to when they write their professional headline, and again where a common mistake is made, is that they will accept LinkedIn's recommendation to default it to whatever their current job title is, which for some people it's not a hideous crime or mistake, but there are other people where that is a mistake. Some people override the text, which you can do. You can have your professional headline, whatever you like within reason. There are some finite limits on space, and they're quite small limits. It's less than a tweet, about 120 characters including spaces. So there's not much room to play with. But the professional headline, a bit of text underneath your name, ought really not to be just your job title, and it certainly ought not to be seeking new role, because what that appears to be, that's not the normal thing to do. And on LinkedIn, it looks like you're desperate, and that's not the kind of message you want to be sending out to anybody, irrespective of whether you are desperate or not to find a new opportunity. So currently seeking new role, replicating your job description, particularly if you've got an unusual job description or a job description that actually doesn't reflect what you want to do in the future, particularly for those people who are trapped in a job that's well beneath their abilities and they've had to take it for whatever reason. So you don't want to just replicate and make that the strongest thing underneath your name, do you? So don't put your job title if it's not the job title you aspire to or are capable of performing. Other way around of looking at it, if you're a managing director, for example, and you'd be quite comfortable being a sales director, which is the level normally below, putting managing director in your professional headline is probably not such a wise idea, because people just look at it and think this guy's too senior, and it will just make snap decisions like that. So a bit like your CV, you need to make sure the message is strong, and it's always giving people a reason as to why they should engage with you, and that's either to read further on your profile, to pick up the phone if you've given them your phone number, to email you if you've given your email address, or to connect with you if that's the only option left available to them. And to do that, you need to get across what is your value proposition. A bit of a cliche, but what is the reason you exist? The reason you exist is not to say, I am currently seeking employment. Your reason to exist is not necessarily that you are insert job title. Your reason to exist is to add value to somebody. It's your current employer potentially right now, or most recent employer. Going forwards, it's a new employer, maybe a new opportunity. So give somebody something to hang on to and explain what on earth you're capable of doing. I'll show you an example very shortly. If you don't know what your value proposition is, why are you on this earth within this role currently that you perform, what are you there to achieve, then you need to seek help and get that answer pretty quickly. And as I say, don't leave the default setting to be your current job title. Now, I said I'd show you an example, so let's just take a quick look at indeed my own profile. So just flashing up on the screen now, you'll see LinkedIn sometimes looks a bit messy, as many of you will be aware. So if you just look in the middle of the screen, you've got my name and my value proposition. Whether anybody agrees with it or not doesn't really matter in the current light of what we're explaining, but it's to, as you can read for yourself, provide professional CV writing and interview coaching services to drive success in the job market. Okay, could be a variety of themes on that, but that is not my job title, of course. My job title wouldn't mean a great deal to most people, so I don't put it there. I'm saying to the marketplace, for those that would be interested, in effect, this is what I'm here to do. This is how I can help you. This is how I can add value. Okay, so just by tweaking that makes a bigger difference than you can imagine. Because if I put there, currently seeking my next contract, currently seeking a job, available now, a lot of people would leave that profile straight away. It would scare them off. They think, well, we don't want somebody who's desperately looking now. We want somebody who's currently keeping their head down, getting on, doing a good job, but we want to be able to lure them away with an attractive proposition. So even the sort of psychology of using LinkedIn, the message you need to be giving, it's all about what value can you add to a potential employer, and don't get hooked up in the, yeah, but I really do need to find something, or I really want to move on. That's not of interest to your target audience. What's of interest to your target audience is the skill set that you have and the value you could bring to them at some point in the future. That's what you need to communicate. So fix that professional summary, makes a big difference straight away. If we take another look at another example, this is my boss, Matt Craven, and so his is reasonably similar. You can see his proposition is that he's basically, and he genuinely is, he's known as a leader in his field, and again, he can drive success in the job market for those people that are interested. Okay, so it's a big difference from just sticking his job title in there and hoping that people will understand what on earth he's on about. That doesn't work these days. Underneath your name, the professional headline and the photograph, there's normally an area called summary. And again, what most people tend to do is they dump the content from their opening statement on the CV and hope that that works. And again, if that's powerful enough on your CV, it's not a bad start. But what most people don't describe is, strangely enough, what are they? What are they? What is their role in life? And this is, you can be a bit more specific now. So if you are a project manager, a managing director, a checkout operator, football manager, whatever you are, you can now reflect that in your summary and describe a little bit about the kind of level you're at, the role you perform. You need to describe broadly, not in any detail, again, I'll show you an example in a minute, what you actually do. And importantly, what are you good at? Again, remembering that you're building the business case, and if there's one message to take away from this evening, is that in any material that you send to anybody about you as a potential employee, so that's principally CV and LinkedIn as the marketplace currently stands, it's always try and strive to build a business case as to why somebody should be interested in you. And to reiterate, that's not a list of things, that's a well-structured piece of content about you and what value you could bring to your potential employer. So that's, what are you, what do you do, what are you good at? And you get those things right, and it can make a big difference to explaining the value you can add. And on the screen now, although it looks quite texty because I had to increase the font size so you can read it, there's an opening statement that broadly would go in a LinkedIn profile and is not exactly the same, but is similar to that which would go on the top of this particular person's CV as an opening summary statement. It addresses all the bullets I've just mentioned. I won't read it through in detail, you can see for yourselves. First thing, what is this person? Well, they're an experienced finance director. What do they do? Well, there's a few things that they're talking about there that they can do, but principally they can protect cash flow and profitability within the business. Where can they add value? Well, it's partly that statement and then partly some of the other things listed. So there's a whole range of things there that they're pretty good at, that they can add value at. Ultimately, they can build businesses and drive profitability. So for a finance director, you'd probably expect that, but you'd be amazed how many finance director or similar CVs we get which read nothing like that. So if your LinkedIn profile and indeed your CV talks about enthusiasm, passion, dedication, commitment, being able to work in a team or as an individual, whilst there are lovely qualities to have as an individual at some stage in your employment, there are virtually no worth to your CV and LinkedIn profile. Nobody's going to call you to interview above others because you are enthusiastic, committed, dedicated, with good interpersonal skills. They'll judge all of those things when they physically meet you or afterwards. And they probably won't really have an idea whether you meet those criteria until you've worked for the business for a number of days, weeks, or even months. So putting them on your CV and LinkedIn profile actually doesn't really help your cause, because all you're talking about is stuff that nobody can prove via your profile or CV. So don't waste the space on that stuff. Focus on the business case you have to offer the world, your potential new employer. And that's about, what are you, what do you do, what are you good at, where can you add value? Everybody at any level, in any role, in any part of the world can write something like this. So although we're featuring something for a fairly senior finance person, anybody can write one of these. Even if you've just graduated and you've got no work experience, you can still write a productive, well-written, concise statement which says what you are, what you're good at, where can you add value. Entirely possible. So again, quick win. Fix that in combination with a better professional headline on your LinkedIn profile makes a big, big difference, because suddenly people sit up and think, hallelujah, here's somebody who's thought about what I might be interested in rather than what they purely got to talk about. And rather than this wonderful candidate talking about all the good things that they are, which are wholly impossible to prove on a CV or LinkedIn profile, somebody's actually taken the time to write some interesting content, some interesting words that make sense, and they give me an idea that this person could be the right candidate for the job, the right candidate for our business, the right candidate for my client. Whatever level they're coming at it from, they'll notice the difference, and it will work to your advantage. Just a quick break, but before I explain some of the things that we get up to, I want to show you again Matt's profile. So on the screen you'll see, we talked about this bit at the top with Matt's name and his professional headline. And you can see in the summary, it's just a block of text. I'll just scroll it up a bit. So it's describing what Matt does, what's he good at, what's his value proposition. Very simple. Doesn't take up much space, but if you were to read that, you get a pretty clear idea about what he's got to offer the world. It's slightly different from Matt. It's his own business. He runs it. He's not likely to be off and up and disappearing anywhere anytime soon. So the way he's structuring his LinkedIn profile is more to appeal to people who might be interested in using the services of his business. That's not too dissimilar from him as an individual, but that is a subtly different message. So if you're running your own business, or you're a contractor, or you're an interim manager, and you're really trying to find clients rather than employers, which is subtly different, then of course you position it accordingly. But it's all about the value proposition you've got to offer, and the value you could offer a business potentially, but building this business case. Why should somebody be interested in you, particularly if they're about to sink a few thousand quid in you? That's the message you always need to focus on. Okay, as I said, if you've got any questions during the course of this session, just tap away in the facility you've got on the toolbar, and I'll deal with them at the end of the session. And one of the most common questions that we get asked is, okay, yeah, if you say you can help, how do you help? And so I'll answer that question. And Webrecruit, obviously, as partners, they say, well, fine, you can do these webinars and talk to people about these subjects, LinkedIn, CVs, whatever. But if you're going to offer them something, make sure you offer them a good deal as well as some advice. So fine, we say that's okay, we will do so. In terms of what we do as a business, I'll reiterate this later, but the first thing you've got to do as an individual is decide whether you need help or not. And if you do need help, i.e. to fix a CV or a LinkedIn profile, you can decide whether you do that yourself using some of the guidance that people like us give for free, like these webinars, or you could seek professional help and get somebody to sort it for you, which of course costs money. If you go down that route and seek professional help, then yeah, we write CVs and LinkedIn profiles from scratch. We help go through the process that will achieve that for people. And it's important to realize if you're going to do this job properly, whether it's with us or anybody else, or indeed your own under your own horsepower, if you like, it isn't the work of a moment. If you ever sat down and tried to write your own CV properly, you probably realize how frustrating it is. Most people make the mistake when they get fed up with it and start doing it themselves and thinking, okay, well, I can't be bothered anymore. And that comes across on paper, both on the profile, LinkedIn profile, as well as your CV. So if you fall into that trap and you know you're not very good at it, then yeah, don't worry in some regards, because you can get help. But if you are competent enough at it, just make sure you spend enough time on the process. It takes us at least 1 to 2 hours just to gather the raw data from people before we even start writing their LinkedIn profile. Same for the CV, really. It normally takes a bit longer on the CV for obvious reasons. But it's not the work of a moment. You can't just look at somebody's CV as it currently stands, scribble a few things down and generate their profile. That's where the mistakes are made. Most people's CVs don't have the right information on them in the first place. So we conduct a fairly lengthy interview with our clients and say, okay, what you're trying to do, where you're trying to head, what have you got to offer in terms of your own value proposition? If you treat yourself as a brand, what have you got to offer the world? Much as if you were going to buy a car, a house, washing machine, a camera, you're looking for clues that it's the right solution to your problem. Same with you. You are a solution to somebody's problem, whether you like it or not. How you position yourself makes a material difference to that objective being achieved. So we need to understand that. We'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out where you've really made some big differences in your work. and want to write them up. More of that in a short while in terms of how it looks on the profile. And there are a number of settings on LinkedIn which you can use to prevent people from seeing what's going on for a period of time, or at least to minimize the amount of traffic that goes on where it publicizes changes to your profile. If you don't know where those settings are, again, that's something we can help you with. But there's so many settings on LinkedIn, it's too much to go into this evening. But you can turn off a lot of them whilst we're amending profiles, or whilst you're making changes and you just want to keep tabs on things and keep a lower profile. I'll come on later to how we might be able to help and what it potentially costs right at the end for those that are interested. But I think it is important. The main thing there is recognise the fact that if you think it's a 5-minute job to sort your profile out, I'm afraid that's just not the case. Whether you do it, I do it, or anybody else does it for that matter, it will probably take you a good half a day to do a LinkedIn profile properly, and a CV probably would take you a day or two of combined time to sort it, because most people just don't have the right information on their profile or CV. Okay, back to the content of the profile. So we've described so far the professional headline, the bit that appears under your name, the summary, and then most people, and there is some options you've got in terms of the structure of LinkedIn, which we might touch on in a short while. But when you're writing your profile, another mistake people make is they take the job that they're most recently or currently doing, and maybe a few others, and just dump all that from their CV into the LinkedIn profile as well. There isn't the need to do that. You only need to summarize each of the roles that you're performing, and even then only a few of the roles, which I'll talk about shortly. So don't go into War and Peace. Don't just copy what you've got on your CV and dump it into each of the jobs that you perform. Just summarize them. You don't even need to have great lengthy lists of bullets describing all your responsibilities and duties. You need a bit of that, but not much. The main focus needs to be on what were you doing inside this particular employer, and what did you actually achieve. So it is like a marketing brochure or a website. And if you visit most people's websites, most professional organizations that have products to sell, they might have a button or a document that you can click for the full specification and all the details, but the website doesn't tend to lead with that. The website's a series of summaries and overviews about whatever the product or service is and how it could benefit you as an individual. And you need to treat your LinkedIn profile the same way. People are not going to spend vast amounts of time looking in detail at your profile. What they want is just a summary. Is this person broadly in the right space? That could be the professional headline and summary. Where has this person been working? So that's the employer. Is there a consistent track record of working in that sector? So that's a combination of the employers and the time spent in the roles that you've performed. And within maybe the top 3 or 4 roles, have they been doing roughly what I'd expect them to be doing as a recruiter or an employer? And that's the summary of each role with some achievements, because the other thing, of course, is has that person been effective in that role or not? So don't treat it the same as you might a CV. It's more of a summary. It's more of a hook to get people interested. And in an ideal world, what you want people to do is look at your profile, and you're wanting them to be compelled to do something else. And that something else is to call you, to email you, or to connect with you on LinkedIn so they can have a further discussion. If you give them too much information, they can make the decision on their own without engaging with you. And some cases that might be positive, and you'll hear from them, but in a lot of cases it might be negative, and you'll never know unless you track who's been looking at your profile. And even then, you won't know why they've been looking at it necessarily. Generally speaking, this is the same that we recommend on CVs as well as the LinkedIn profile. You don't want to provide too much detail about older careers. There's no requirement on LinkedIn to give all of the details of all your employers if you've got a career that's more than 10 years long. LinkedIn will encourage you to complete everything under the sun, and that's to be resisted. Rather unhelpfully, LinkedIn will also score your profile. So for those that know the system well, often you'll see on the right-hand side of your own profile the strength of your profile as seen by LinkedIn, and it ranges from basic to intermediate to advanced with all sorts of different levels, all-star I think being one of the top ones. Now unfortunately the rating is affected by things that actually don't necessarily make a great deal of difference to your success at getting interviews and interest from employers and recruiters. So, for example, you could have a photograph and that would increase your profile. You could argue that having a photograph might actually make a difference, but if it was a photograph of a monkey, as far as LinkedIn is concerned, it would still register as a photograph, and therefore your profile strength would go up. But I guarantee you'd get a whole lot less interest from recruiters and employers if you stuck a photograph of a monkey on your profile. So it just shows you that don't be sucked in and fooled by LinkedIn's automated criteria, and just by completing as much data as you think LinkedIn is requesting and it scoring your profile higher is necessarily a good thing. It isn't. It's the quality of the content, irrespective whether you filled out all the boxes or not, that makes the difference to people reading the profile. So yes, you need to be found. Yes, you need people to be compelled by what they read to do something, but that is the overriding quality of your profile. It's the content on that profile, not the fact that you filled in every single box. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest the more you fill in, the worse your profile gets from a recruiter or employer's point of view, because a lot of stuff there is irrelevant and won't help your cause and may start to turn people off. So if you've got a career more than 10 years long, don't detail everything before then, because it just doesn't make any difference. Always remember you're building a business case as to why somebody should do something with you right now or in the immediate or near future. What you did in 1980-something or 1990-something even these days, and certainly 1970-something if that applies, is of no material benefit. So let's just take another look quickly at an example, and we'll take Matt's CV again. So you'll notice on your screen appearing now is partway through Matt's LinkedIn profile. So he's describing in a reasonable amount of detail, but again, he's not listing a whole heap of duties and responsibilities and stuff that he's copied off his CV, or worse still off his job description. He's just mentioning reference to areas where he can add value to anybody reading this text. So that's he's building a business case, in other words. I keep going on about it, but it is really important. He's building a case as to why somebody should be interested in his services and the business he has to run. And then you'll notice a little bit further down, very brief information about some of the other things he's done, mainly just to build, in his case, to build credibility and to show that he's come from a background relevant to what he's claiming to be. You'll notice there's nothing before 1994 because there's no relevance in that as far as his career is concerned and what people will make a decision on. And that's how you need to treat it. It's what is relevant in your marketplace and how should you express that. Because most people could write a book about their careers, but that's not going to get you interviews. So hopefully now you can start to see, if you just merely dump information onto LinkedIn, think that you've done it, tick the box, leave it, you could actually be doing yourself a lot of harm. You need to think about it much more deeply. What have you got to offer? What's your value proposition? What are you good at? Where are you adding value to a potential employer or recruiter, if that's your objective, and expressing that in a concise, compelling way. You get that sorted, you don't need to have a very big profile, and it will start working for you much more effectively. You get it wrong, and it will be like having an ineffective CV. You won't get that many phone calls, you won't get that many emails, and jobs you apply for won't tend to generate too many interviews because people will check you out on LinkedIn if you have a profile, and you'll be judged on that as well as your CV. Okay, one area where you can get a really big win, but most people tend not to use at all, is an area on LinkedIn called projects. Now, some of you may not even know what this is, and most of the people that arrive on our doorstep, when we say projects, LinkedIn, they say, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Where is that? and I'll show you very shortly. But it's a brilliant area to showcase things that you've done that you're particularly proud of. Again, thinking about what adds value and what builds your business case. So if they're great things that you did, you're really proud of them, but they have no relevance to the modern world or where you want to be in a year or two's time, there's no point in mentioning them. But for those things that were relevant, are relevant, or could be relevant, it's a really useful facility that LinkedIn has. Now on your screen now, again, is a whole wall of text at first glance, but it's typical of an example that we would write up as a project on LinkedIn using a particular methodology that we use, and I would heartily recommend. It's a really useful way of breaking up complex projects or events into concise, compelling text. It's also a really good way of handling competency-based questions at interview. I'll come on to that in a short while. So again, I won't read all the text, but this is Matt earlier in his career. For those eagle-eyed of you, when you saw his LinkedIn profile, you'll have noticed that the first job on his, or earliest job on his LinkedIn profile was with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and that's what ERAC stands for. So Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So we're breaking this project that he was involved with into 4 chunks. The situation, which is the background, the sort of header, if you like, the explanation about what it was all about, and that's the first sentence of that paragraph you can see on screen. So Enterprise Rent-A-Car acquired an unprofitable competitor, blah-de-blah-de-blah, that required transformation. That's the situation. The task is the responsibility resting on Matt's shoulders at that particular time in the role he had at that time. So he was appointed operations manager to rebrand the business and do a few things, essentially to drive profitability. That's the task. The next chunk of sentences, until the last sentences, are the actions that Matt took in that job at that time to move things from A to Z. And you can read those for yourself. And the final sentence is the result, and that is that he succeeded in rebranding the business. He achieved a certain level of profitability within a certain time period. So in a relatively short space of time, he's been able to explain to anybody interested a real-life example of something that he did that's impactful, that demonstrates a competence and a capability across a number of areas in a small enough space to make people think, yeah, that's worth reading, I can remember that, I can absorb it, I can understand it. Most of all, it's quite compelling. It's telling a positive story about how Matt can add value to a business if they were interested in that. Now again, anybody with any experience, again, even if you're a graduate with no work experience, anybody can write these things if they think about what their target audience are looking for, what have I got to offer from my toolkit of experiences in life. You don't need to write many of these. Typically on a CV we put 3 of these, what we call career highlights on a CV, but projects on LinkedIn. We'd write some of these because they really do provide the hard evidence to back up claims that have been made earlier in the LinkedIn profile or on your CV. Now these, again, are not easy. Most people we deal with, we have to extract this information, sometimes taking quite a lot of effort and time, because a lot of people don't realize the good stuff that they've done, or they undervalue it. And so we spend a lot of time trying to work out what are people looking for in their sector of expertise, what have they got to offer as an individual to match that, finding examples of it, and then describing them in this kind of manner. I mentioned if you're ever asked a competency-based question, if you start to remember a handful of these events in your life, structure them in this manner using the STAR methodology, it's again a really good way of being able to answer somebody's question. So for example, if Matt was sitting down at an interview and somebody said, okay, Matt, you claim on your CV to be able to make a difference in business, give us an example of when you did that, where you made a difference. And his answer may be the sentence or paragraph that you see on your screen. To read that from start to finish would take, I don't know, 20 seconds, something like that, less than half a minute anyway. That kind of answer would always pass muster at an interview. What people tend to do is they struggle to think of an example if they've not prepared well, or they answer the question eventually, but they take several minutes to do it, ramble off in a number of different directions, and fail to address the core question in the first place. So it takes practice, but either on paper, on the CV, on your LinkedIn profile, or verbally, it's a really useful way of being able to package information that's actually quite detailed, but into a nice manageable amount. So we recommend, if you're going to write your LinkedIn profile and make it really work for you, use the projects facility and construct some examples. Now, for those of you who've never seen it before, let me just quickly show you. On the screen now is my sort of webinar-based LinkedIn profile thing, which I mess around with, so it looks pretty hideous at the moment because it always gets buttons pressed where it shouldn't be. But if you go to your LinkedIn profile, if you have one already, hit the Edit Profile button or option, you'll get a screen that looks pretty similar to the one you can see on screen at the moment. And then down the right-hand side, there'll be a number of options depending on how much information you've already filled out on your profile. But lurking somewhere in that list will be this projects area. And if you just click on that, you can enter the name of the project, which we tend to put as a nice describer. So in Matt's case, it could be business rescue, business turnaround, because that enterprise rent-a-car example was a good example of a turning around a business. You can choose the job that you're in when you perform that role, so it links it to that in LinkedIn. If there were a website attached to it, you could put it. If there were people associated with the project, you could add them. And then you put in the text. So that paragraph I showed you on screen would get dumped into that box there with the description. Hit save. You've got then a project on LinkedIn profile, and you can add a large number of projects. And we probably recommend somewhere between 3 to 8, depending on the kind of job you have and the experiences you've had. So you wouldn't want to go overboard. But they're a really good way of drawing attention to the skills and competencies that you have as an individual. As I say, most people tend not to use that facility, which is a shame. So quick win number, whatever it is use projects, but write up good content. If you don't use relevant examples, or if you use weak examples, that can do you a lot of harm, because it makes people think, well, hang on a minute, they just proclaimed to be a good such and such a person, but this example of the project's got nothing to do with that, so why did they do that? Conversely, if you've got a weak example with no real conclusion or result to it, people will think, well, they just mentioned that for the sake of it. Again, it doesn't make me think they're that strong an operator. Okay, some other considerations, some other quick wins and things just to be wary of as far as LinkedIn's concerned as we near the end of this session. Note at the bottom of the screen is really important, actually. It's linked to another statistic, which is that, when we're doing our CV webinars, we talk about quite a lot. If you're applying for a job, unless you're very lucky, you're probably not one of the people who are known already by the recruiter, or not known well enough for them to make a judgment on you without looking at your CV or without passing the CV to their client. And if you're applying to employers, they probably don't know you at all, of course. So the only means that an employer or a hiring manager has got to decide whether they should interview you or not are the contents of your CV normally first, swiftly followed by the contents of your LinkedIn profile. Although there's a lot of evidence now that that balance is shifting, and that some people will arrive at your LinkedIn profile first, make a judgment on that, and then may decide whether they contact you for a job or not. Either which way, the message here is that the vast majority of people will check you out on LinkedIn, and the only means that they've got to assess your abilities are either LinkedIn in isolation or a combination of a CV and LinkedIn. So you can see if and why is that important? Well, because they've got no crystal ball. They can't judge you from any other means other than what you've sent them. So if you're sending them dodgy information, if you're not building a business case and you're up against 2 or 3 other candidates amongst the 100 or so applicants who have built a strong business case, guess who's likely to get the interview? It only takes a handful of people to have gotten it right. They'll be the ones that get the interview because they've presented a strong business case. They may not be the best candidate for the job, but unfortunately it's too late by the time somebody's made that decision for you to be part of the process. So again, going back to that indicator, if you're getting lots of interviews or a satisfactory number of interviews for your applications, probably all is well. Happy days. If you're not, it's a combination of the CV and or your LinkedIn profile which are letting you down. You then need to decide whether to do something about that or not. And then what you do obviously varies. But those are the indicators. The only means those recruiters and hirers have got of deciding who to interview is the CV and or LinkedIn profile. But at least then that gives you the measurement criteria. At least you can assess whether you have a problem or not. The good news is, of course, you can fix those things if you know there's a problem. So that really just highlights the importance of getting your message across properly. If you get the message correct, everything else will follow. Some of the things that people tend to get wrong, which influences how people think about you. If you've ever tried to connect with somebody and introduce yourself to another person on LinkedIn, if it's a friend, a colleague, it doesn't matter so much. But if it's anybody that might influence whether you get to interview, whether they might consider you as a candidate for an opportunity, or whether you're thinking about that individual who might be able to help you in future weeks or months, that you'll know that when you hit the, in effect, the connect button and please introduce me, there's a default message which says, hi, I'd like you to link with me on LinkedIn, or words to that effect. Change that message, because it just looks sloppy if you go with the default and sign your name at the bottom. Make it a little bit more personalized. Take the time to think about the reasons why you're connecting with people. Don't use the default message. Within LinkedIn, there is a really good area called skills and expertise, which most people use, but most people underuse. And that's the area where you can pre-select skills, up to 50, I think is the number, where you can pre-select skills and competencies that you've got, which are available on LinkedIn, and you literally just select the box that's most appropriate. So for those that use it, you'll know you can type into this area, say project management, as long as any other reference to project will appear in a drop-down box, and you select the one that's relevant. Make use of that facility, because it's used a lot by recruiters and employers to search for people at the first cut, if you like. So they'll make a decision, and they'll say, well, in an ideal world, we want, I don't know, to look at 100 people's profiles who've got project management experience or sales experience in a particular area, and with certain skills, and they'll just literally tick the boxes that they want for those skills. So if you've missed one or two, chances are you'll appear less, if at all, in their search. So get that bit sorted. Again, many of you will know you can be recommended by people. Do not confuse this with being endorsed. So for those of you who know LinkedIn, where you have a skill or expertise and somebody endorses you for it and their little photo appears alongside that particular skill or expertise, that is not recommendations as far as LinkedIn is concerned. Recommendations are provided by a third party who in effect is saying, yeah, I've worked with Joe Blogs, they're a good operator, I wholeheartedly recommended them. They can only be provided by the individual making the recommendations, or you can provide recommendations, of course, to other third parties. Within a degree or so of sensibility, it's a good idea to write recommendations for people you generally would recommend, because they always refer back to you, and that improves the quality of your profile and how people might find you. But don't go overboard. Don't seek recommendations from friends, relatives, pals, colleagues. Try and keep it to people who've actually employed you or made decisions about you because of your skills and abilities. And don't give recommendations to people who just happen to be your buddy if you can avoid it, because that just it looks weak. Recommend people who generally provided good service, advice, or you've employed. You can join groups, and that's a good thing, because then you can contact people within that group directly who aren't even part of your network. So if you're out there looking for opportunities and you spot a group that seems relevant, an industry group or a skills group or a sector group or something to do with whatever you're interested in, become a member, and that enables you to contact a whole heap of people that might otherwise been difficult to contact. And if it's appropriate, it depends on your job and on what you're trying to do, but it is good to participate in some of the discussions that those groups then have, because it helps build your authority. and credibility in the marketplace, and it builds a trail that people will look at and think, yeah, okay, this person seems to be active in their marketplace, so the claims they've made on their CV or profile about having market knowledge, sector knowledge, expertise is backed up by the fact that at least they are a member of groups that reflect that. So think about that and use it if it's appropriate to do so. If you get recommended by people, it has a marked impact in a positive way in terms of people actually then wanting to do something with you. So interestingly, we've started putting recommendations, mostly that come from LinkedIn, on CVs, and it makes a huge difference. It adds a layer of value and credibility to the individual before they've been met, that sort of just makes people feel comfortable that somebody out there agrees with the sentiment of the CV. So having them on LinkedIn know that it makes a big difference to people getting selected for interview, because it adds that layer of quality and credibility. It's difficult to get decent references these days. Having a good recommendation on LinkedIn makes a big difference. And then I won't get into the detail right now, but if you've got a LinkedIn profile, you'll know that the URL for your profile is often a whole load of gobbledygook. You can set up what's called a vanity URL, which makes it a lot easier for people to remember and use, which could just be your name. That's worth considering. Take a look at it. And then finally, on this particular area, you can drag and drop sections of LinkedIn. So don't go with the default setting. For those that haven't spotted it, again, I'll just show you quickly. We're almost out of time now. If you go onto a LinkedIn profile, I'll just wait for your screens to refresh. Okay, now you're looking at my profile again. Doesn't matter which section, the principle is the same pretty much everywhere, but where you've got, and I'm just sort of highlighting the little arrow, the up and down arrow to the very far right hand side of the summary section. So you've got heading summary, then edit, then a strange hieroglyphic, what looks like a box with a plus sign and a drop down, and then this little up down arrow. If you click on that and drag and drop, I don't know how much you're going to be able to see on the screen with the refresh time, but you'll notice my whole summary area is now floating. And you can do this with any section and drop it somewhere else within the profile, and everything else will then reorder. Again, I won't go into the details now, but there is a better way of sorting it than LinkedIn's default. The default is better than nothing, and if you've got a good default setting, it's fine. It's just that there are ways and means of sorting this section to read more to build a business case, a better flow, if you like. So we recommend taking a look at that. Okay, almost done. In terms of the what next, as I've banged on about, very first thing you probably need to make a decision about is whether you actually need to do anything about your CV and LinkedIn profile, and particularly LinkedIn profile as we're talking about that, at all. As I say, the acid test is if it's getting you interest, people approaching you about things that are relevant, you're getting interviews because of the CV and or LinkedIn. You may not know which one is responsible, but if you're getting the interviews, then everything's okay. You've probably got the right kind of content. But if you are not getting a satisfactory level of interviews, then the first thing you need to do is say, okay, well, I need to do something because that's not a satisfactory situation. Can I sort it myself? Do I need help? And as an individual, you'll know whether you're up to the task and whether it's something you fancy sitting down and spending a couple of hours on and sorting. But if you don't, then my message is just, we exist, others exist, you can get help. The downside is you need to pay for it. The upside is we've got some great offers. And so Webrecruit said to us, well, make sure you put together a good deal for people. And so there's 2 levels of deal available for attendees of the webinars. Although we've not gone into any detail, of course, it was all about LinkedIn. But if you feel that your CV is not effective, the best value deal that we offer to webinar delegates is a combined CV and LinkedIn profile rewrite. Now, this is for anybody with more than 7 years work experience. If you've got less than 7 years experience, you probably need to contact us directly because it's not fair that you pay this price, however discounted it is. So for anybody with more than 7 years experience who wants their CV and LinkedIn profile sorting professionally, which will make a difference to the number of interviews you get, that much is proven, then normally 2 of those things together would cost $349 plus VAT. Tonight we're doing it for $275 plus VAT, so it's a big saving. If you just want the LinkedIn profile on its own, we do that normally 150 quid plus VAT, but tonight chopping a bit off that as well, so 125 plus VAT. The best deal is the CV and LinkedIn profile, because we're speaking with you once, we might as well collect the data and use it for 2 purposes. The reason why the LinkedIn profile, and some people say, oh, crumbs, that's quite a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, of course, but it still takes us 2 hours to have a conversation with you to get the information out of you for your profile or a CV. It doesn't matter which one it is, we still need to have that conversation, and without it, you won't get the quality of information, and I'm afraid that costs money. With either of those deals, they're time limited, so until the end of this week, Friday 24th, that deal is open and available to anybody interested in it. The first 10 that order get more, so it's whether you order the CV and LinkedIn or the LinkedIn on its own right. First 10 that order get a free cover letter and an interview coaching package, which is a really useful tool where you can practice how to interview against questions that you select, all done over the internet via an automated system. It records you, you can play it back, see how you performed, and get some practice. It's a really useful device. The first 10 orders of either of those 2 offers get that as part of the deal as well. But to get it, you've got to visit this website, and I'll just put in the chat room facility the actual link, because I don't think you can actually click on it from your screens. Unfortunately, it's one piece of functionality that doesn't exist within GoToWebinar. So I'll just paste that link, and if it's useful, take it away with you. If you don't need it, ignore it, that will allow you to participate in the deal. If you've got any other questions or want to speak to us individually, then by all means visit our website, give us a call, send us an email. The email address is at the bottom of the screen now. I'm more than happy to help. We give advice for free. This webinar has obviously been for free. We take a look at people's CVs and evaluate them for free, and all of those details on our website. But for those people that do actually genuinely want help, obviously you get a great deal. Okay, so that's the end of tonight's session. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that useful. As I said, the 2 most important messages are probably be on LinkedIn if you're not on it, unless you've got a very good reason. But above all, whatever you're writing about yourself, CV or LinkedIn, remember to build a strong business case as to why somebody should be hiring you. And if you have difficulty with that, you can get help. Now, I promised I'd deal with any questions. I haven't kept an eye on things, so I don't know whether anyone asked, but let me just check that. So if you need to go, by all means, you can sign off now, disappear. Good night to you, good luck, and thanks for your time. For those that have asked questions, I'll now take a look at them and deal with as much as I can in the time permitting. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, not too many, so it shouldn't take too long to go through these. Obviously, if you've got any questions whilst we're going through this, by all means ask them. Radhika, how detailed should I write about my achievements on LinkedIn profile for each position? Not too much detail, Radhika. Generally speaking, just enough for people to get a flavour. I saw something today where somebody wrote in something, words to the effect that one of their biggest achievements was launched a computer system. Now, that might well be a really big achievement. To most people, they'll look at it and think, well, what computer system? How big? How many users? To what benefit did it provide? What was it responsible for running? So, in other words, that was nowhere near enough information. Conversely, if you go and write too much, people will lose the will or lose interest. Our recommendation is that you probably write about well, a paragraph, no more than a paragraph, and it depends where you're putting it on the LinkedIn profile as well. If it's one of those projects that I mentioned, as I say, a modest paragraph would suffice, and break it up using that STAR methodology I showed you. So the situation, task, actions, result. situation, a sentence. Task, a sentence. Actions, 3 or 4, 5 things maximum that you did to go from point A to point Z, and then the result, a sentence. So by default, you land up with a modest paragraph explaining an achievement. That would be my recommendation. Rodika, again, if the projects which I worked for are confidential, how could I describe it in the project line on LinkedIn? This is public profile. Yeah, really good question, Rodika, actually. And on the CV, this is also an issue for some people. If they genuinely are confidential, then we genericize stuff. So, for example, I did some work last year with somebody out of a high-tech police crimes unit, and that was a real eye-opener and another story altogether. But they obviously had been involved in some highly sensitive, highly secretive work, looking at people's computers, stuff on the internet, and had used some tools that I didn't even know existed to investigate some very dodgy cases, criminal cases. So of course they couldn't explain all the detail. So we had to strip it back. We just had to keep coming back and back and back until the individual was happy with what we were going to write for them. And so you can always do that. You can always genericize. So some people are really uncomfortable. For example, this may not be appropriate to you, but as an example, if you're talking about having saved money or saved headcount or reduced costs, or there was a problem with a company a certain size, people don't want to give away the details. So you can come back and say, okay, what about percentages? So rather than saying, say, 1.2 million in costs, say 26%. Nobody knows the start point, nobody knows the end point, but 26% is a pretty big number. It means something. It still sounds impactful, but it gives nothing away about the actual detail. If somebody describes a business and they can't be seen to mention particular brand names or clients of that business or individuals, you come back and describe it by, for example, a job title or a senior management instead of such and such a director. You can always come back a level, so it just needs a little bit of thought and attention. And I think that's it, because Antonia, who will successfully have to leave the webinar, so there's no point in dealing with that. So I'll hang on for about 30 more seconds, but unless there are any other questions, thanks very much again for your time. Good night to you all. You're free to go, and if we can be of any help, you know where we are. Thanks again, and I'll start signing this off and close the webinar down. Cheers.